Hello crafty friends, I'm Lien from Studio Kato and I'm so glad you're joining me again today. Today I have a fun flat Christmas shaker for you guys because it's Christmas in July over at Streamside Studios. For this card I'm using a digital stamp. It's the very fun Making Snow Angels by Streamside Studios. I printed it out onto Clairefontaine DCP 250 GSM paper, and I'm coloring it with my alcohol markers. These happen to be the Décotime Twinmarkers, but you can absolutely use whatever you have. The markers I'm using are really cheap. They're from Action, which is available in Europe, I think, but not in the US. But I think you can find these on Amazon as well. They have a bullet nib and a brush nib, although the older sets have a bullet nib and a chisel nib. I find it really easy to use bullet nibs. I rarely use my brush nibs, even though they're available to me. I just think I get a better and more detailed result with the finer nibs. I'm always coloring from my darkest to my lightest color. I feel like that gives me the best blend, but of course you do whatever works for you. I'm using a very limited color palette for this fairy. I'm just using red, green, some brown for the hair, and I'm repeating the red and the green in the holly and the berries. So I'm using the classic Christmas colors, which I rarely do for my Christmas cards, but sometimes it's just fun. I've said it many times before, but for me, coloring is all about layering. For alcohol markers, I often go back to my darkest color at the end to deepen up the shadows, which I do with pretty much any medium. But for the markers, I also use my lightest color once again, just to smooth everything out after I'm done with my last layer of the shadows. I colored outside the lines a couple of times, so I just smoothed that out with my colorless blender. I used a really pale blue to color in the wings, and then I'm finishing off her little outfit with some grays. Now I'm adding some details to the berries and the fur with a white gel pen. Now onto the background. I am covering my fingers with a bit of purple tape because I don't want to reactivate the ink and pick it up with my fingers every time I touch the background. And I'm using Distress Oxide inks to cover my whole panel. This is an A2 sized piece of Clairefontaine 250 GSM DCP paper. I'm covering the entire panel with tumbled glass. I like to do the entire thing even though you'll only see a little bit of it in the middle, because it will affect the other colors you put on top. I'm using Stormy Sky as my midtone, and then I will use tumbled glass again to lighten up that middle once again. My last color is Chipped Sapphire, and I'm just bringing that in around the edges. And once I'm happy with that, I will take out my piece of vellum that I pre-cut, and I will check if the colors are okay when looked through the vellum. Now I decorated some leaves from a Mama Elephant set. It's the Botanical envelope set. And I am putting them back into the negative space because I want to add some color to them by ink blending. I put some purple tape on the back of the negative space to keep them in place. And you could just put them on purple tape without saving the negative space around it, but I find that still pulls up the edges of the die cut and creases them often. So I find this is the best way to do it. I'm blending these pretty roughly to give them some interest, and especially these leaves you won't see as well because we're gonna layer the vellum on top and some more branches on top. I'm using a couple colors here. I think I used Mowed Lawn and Forest Moss, and then I added some splatter using those same colors. I'm doing the same thing for the pine branches, and as you can see I often use very small scraps of white cardstock to die cut from. So yeah, I saved most of my scraps of white cardstock. I'm doing the same thing here, popping them all back into their negative space. And again, I'm using a couple of different colors. Here I'm just using whatever was left on my brush the first time around, and then some of the Pine Needle Distress Oxide ink. And again, I'm finishing it up with some splatter. And yes, this went absolutely everywhere. I'm surprised it didn't hit the camera. Okay, now I'm adhering the leaves onto the background itself, and I'll save the pine branches for later. I'm using some Barely Art Precision Craft Glue. Now adhering things on a Distress Oxide blended background, especially if it's not completely dry yet, might be a little bit tricky, so you best put something heavy on top for a little bit. Now I'm just checking my placement of all the elements. And then I'm going to trace the little snow edge of her snow angel. This was included in the stamp, but I thought it would be nice to emboss it on the vellum. So that's exactly what I'll do. So I roughly sketched that out with pencil, and then I'm using the Versamarker to add Versamarker embossing ink to the vellum. I'm using the bright white embossing powder from Wow to emboss this, and then I can put my shaker card together. So this vellum piece is, I think I forgot to mention it, but it's 1 inch larger on each side, and I'm just folding that over the background that we made before. And then I'm adhering 3 of the sides, leaving 1 open to add some glitter, with double-sided tape. I'm keeping the shaker fairly neutral because it's ice or snow, right? So I am adding some chunky glitter that's just iridescent, some less chunky glitter in silver, and some clear sequins by Picket Fence Studios. And then I'm sealing off that final edge, also with double-sided tape. That finishes up the shaker element, so I can just add that again with double-sided adhesive to my top folding white note card. And then my sister came in and offered me a candy. Now I'm adhering the pine branches on top. I like how it adds some depth to the card to have the leaves underneath the vellum and the pine branches on top of it all. And then I just trim off the excess. I'm using 2 layers of foam tape, so I fold it over and then cut it into pieces to adhere my little fairy on top of the card. And then we're almost finished. I'm using the Wink of Stella brush marker to add some sparkle to her wings. And to finish up the branches, I'm going to be adding some berries with red metallic Nuvo drops. This is such a gorgeous, dark, deep red. I really like it for Christmas cards. I'm varying the size of the berries to add some interest. And then I'm doing the same in the top corner. And that finishes up the card. I really like all the sparkle and that it's a little bit more subtle because there's vellum in front of it instead of acetate. Now the matching envelope is super easy this time. I'm just using some of my patterned paper. This one is a Christmas collection from Action. It's super thick and sturdy. And there's some fun foil detail. I'm just adhering that together with the Barely Art glue, and that finishes up the project for today. This shaker card was definitely inspired by Amy R. from Prairie Paper and Ink, and I'm so glad I finally tried this technique. I really love the result. You can find the full list of supplies in the description below. It's right underneath the subscribe button, so make sure to hit that on your way there. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.